Good morning. My name is Jana, and I'm a grateful believer who's a survivor of physical and sexual abuse, and I struggle with codependency. When I first came to Celebrate Recovery, I didn't really think I needed to be here. I'd spent many years in therapy, and I thought I had it figured out. But my marriage was in trouble, and I thought it might help me a little bit. Besides, it got me out of the house a couple of nights a week. I grew up on a large farm in southeastern Oklahoma, and the closest town had a population of 150 people. I was the youngest of 5 children, with 3 older sisters and a brother. I don't think my parents wanted children. It seemed to me they just needed workers for the farm. I learned how to work hard, which served me later in life. I worked from sunrise to after sunset, sometimes 7 days a week, except for Sunday mornings when we went to church. I felt like a slave, trapped and hopeless. As a young girl, I attended church with my mother and siblings every time the doors were open, at least 3 times a week. Every time we went to church, I pretended to be happy because appearances were very important. Feelings didn't exist. I longed for someone to see the pain I felt inside and rescue me from my own private hell. While on the outside, my family presented itself as a wholesome, church-going family, reality was much different. As a child, I lived in great fear. Things happen when people live in isolated places that would never happen if other people were around. My father was full of anger and rage. He sexually abused me and my sisters for several years. He was also very brutal. He tortured me in unimaginable ways, and then he laughed at my terror. When I threatened to tell someone what he was doing, he tried to kill me. My mother was abusive in other ways. She was the master of guilt and shame, and of course, denial. And I certainly couldn't have feelings. I spent most of my childhood in isolation. I became a Christian at around 10 years old, and as a young girl, I was really conflicted about God because I thought he was kind and caring, but I was also taught that he was punishing. And I often wondered if some of the horrific things happening to me were a form of God's punishment for some small sin I had committed. I didn't understand why God wouldn't stop the abuse. If he could do something so great as to part the Red Sea to rescue the Israelites from Egypt, couldn't he do something to protect me? I felt like I wasn't worthy of his attention. There was no one I felt like I could trust, not even God. Shortly after I was allowed to start dating at age 16, I met a boy that really cared about me. And I was so excited about the positive attention and felt really special for the first time in my life. Soon he wanted to have sex, and I actually didn't know I had the right to say no. And I got pregnant when I was 16. Well, my mother's guilt and shame was in high gear at this point. My parents allowed us to get married right away, but not in our church, because soon people would know that I had to. I was such a disgrace to my family. They refused to attend my wedding, and to top it off, they planned a party to show off their new house the same night that I got married. That's when I decided to quit going to church. We'll talk about jumping from the frying pan into the fire. My new husband was physically abusive. Our daughter was born the summer between my junior and senior years of high school. I completed my senior year and worked at night to help make ends meet. But my husband continued to be abusive. Once he hit me and gave me a black eye that lasted for 2.5 weeks. My parents heard about it, and my mother told me that I made my bed, now go back home to my husband. I had nowhere else to go, so I did. When my daughter was 1 year old, he kicked her across the room. And I finally got up the courage to leave him and to face my parents' wrath and more of my mother's shaming and guilt. I knew that there weren't many options for me, and to be able to move away from this small town and support my daughter, I would need a college education. So I signed up for all the grants that I could, and I received welfare to cover my living expenses, and I worked part-time. I also thought if I got a good college education that I would feel better about myself. I wanted to move away as soon as I could, so I went to summer school, and I completed my Bachelor of Science degree in 3.5 years. While I was in college, I tried escaping life any way I could. I developed a pattern of love and relationship addiction, and I used alcohol and drugs to numb my pain. After graduation, I still felt empty inside, and I thought, if only I could get a good job, I'll feel better about myself. So I got a job, and my daughter and I moved to West Palm Beach, Florida, where I knew no one. And after 2 years of still feeling empty and lonely, we moved to Fort Worth, Texas, where I was able to get a much better job, thinking that would fill the hole in my heart. But it didn't. In my search to end my pain, I got married again. But that marriage didn't work out either, nor did it fill my emptiness, so I turned to my work. I got positive rewards for working hard, and I began the trek up the corporate ladder in workaholism. I went to night school and got a master's in business administration, thinking I would feel good enough if I just got a little more education. I had a very successful career by most people's standards. I had a good job in a large aerospace company, made more money than I ever imagined possible, and I got to travel all over the world. I even flew an airplane that's in the Smithsonian Museum today. Not bad for a small-town girl that was told she wasn't smart enough to get in out of the rain. But my life still felt incomplete. As far back as I can remember, I believed in God, but I didn't have a relationship with him, much less trust him. After several invitations from a friend, I finally went to church with her. I started to believe that maybe my idea of God had been wrong and got mixed up with my feelings about my father, who had hurt me so much. I was still afraid and pretty cautious about trusting God, and most of my prayers were pretty selfish. Gimme, gimme, gimme. Something was still missing in my life. While I was on a business trip to New Jersey, I met a wonderful man from Orange County, California, and we fell in love. I think I was still looking for someone to rescue me and fill that emptiness I felt inside. So I left my job of 15 years, my friends, and my daughter and grandson who were living with me at the time, and I moved to Southern California the summer of 2000 when we got married. And I thought this was the love that I've been waiting for and would make my life complete. We began attending Saddleback Church. I found myself halfway across the country from anyone I knew except for my husband, and we faced many challenges. I started to think that maybe this marriage was another mistake. With no friends in Orange County, I found myself turning more and more to God. I sensed him telling me just hang in there and assuring me that he had a plan for my life. God wouldn't give me permission to move back to my old familiar life in Texas. I finally realized that no matter what happened in my marriage, I needed to work on myself, or I would continue to run from myself. At this point, my third marriage was hanging on by a thread. I decided to attend Celebrate Recovery one Friday night, not really sure I fit in because I didn't have an alcohol or drug problem, but I thought it was worth a try. Well, the very next week, I started a step study group because I knew I needed to take a more in-depth look at my life, even though I wasn't really sure I needed to. I thought I had a pretty strong relationship with God, but as I worked the program, I grew even closer to him. Going through the step study helped me to look at my life from God's perspective, how he wants me to be, and now he is the center of my life. I realized that Jesus was the only one who could fill that emptiness and heal my hurts. I think the hardest step for me, besides stepping through those doors for the first meeting, was Principle 3. Trust was a huge issue for me. You may identify with that. The two people that I should have been able to trust the most in my life, my parents, were not trustworthy. Trust is a huge issue for anyone who grows up in an unsafe home. I was afraid to trust anyone, even God. But in my insecurity, I was also full of pride, thinking, I'm a smart woman. I don't need anyone to help me. I would consult God sometimes about things in my life, but not really trust him. So for me to turn my will and my life over to God meant that I had to really trust him, and that was so scary to me. Principle 4 was pretty scary for me too. But as I think about it, I think I was more afraid just thinking about writing my inventory than actually doing it. Putting it down on paper really helped me to sort out what was mine and what was other people's stuff. I was able to see that the guilt and shame that I'd felt about what my father did to me didn't belong to me. Going through the inventory helped me to see that it wasn't my fault and that I could finally let go of the burden I had been carrying around for most of my life. Now, that didn't get me off the hook for the things I'd done, and there was plenty. I had to face the wrongs that I had done and make amends to the people I had hurt, but I could let go of the guilt that I felt about that, too. The other big barrier to healing my heart was unforgiveness. I still carried all those years of hurt buried deep inside me. Through God's grace, I was able to experience the freedom and the joy of forgiveness. I was finally able to forgive my father for the evil things he did to me, and that was such a relief. I was able to forgive my mother for her emotional abuse and for not protecting me from my father. I was able to forgive myself for passing along the dysfunctional behavior to my daughter and for not being the parent that she needed. I asked forgiveness from God for the wrong ideas that I'd had about him, and because of that, I was able to let go of my bitterness and anger that I had toward him, and that was a liberating experience for me. When I was finally able to let out my anger, do you know what God did? He loved me. He accepted my anger, understanding it. He didn't strike me down with lightning like I feared he might. Instead, I felt him put his loving arms around me, and he told me that he had been waiting and waiting and waiting for that moment of surrender and trust. Now, I can have the kind of relationship with him that he designed me to have. Through Celebrate Recovery, I've learned a lot about myself, and most of the time can separate my stuff from other people's. I've also learned to set better boundaries. God didn't sweep down and rescue me from the abuse like I wanted him to, but I know he's using those experiences to help others. I believe God doesn't waste a hurt. He will use our greatest hurt to serve him by helping others if we let him. I know that he's using my painful experience with abuse to help others. I have no doubt that my story is helping someone right now. Even though I didn't realize it, God has always been with me, weeping when I was weeping and waiting for me to really trust him. I got so much out of my step study that I knew I had to give back. Today I'm a step study group leader, and I have the privilege of leading women through the healing principles of Celebrate Recovery. I also serve Jesus in other ways. 2.5 years ago, I went on my first Saddleback mission trip to Africa. Little did I know what God had in store for me there, and that this trip would be a turning point in my life. I gave my testimony for the first time ever while I was there. As I was giving my testimony on that Sunday morning in Deliverance Church in the rural town of Kitale, Kenya, I felt God put his loving arms around me, and I had a clarity I'd never known before. He did save me when my father tried to kill me. He saved me so I could be in Kenya sharing my testimony at that very moment. And I was right where God wanted me to be. And I don't know why, but God has really put those people on my heart. On trips since then, I've had the joy of teaching Celebrate Recovery, the biblical principles of Celebrate Recovery to women in prison in Kenya, live in such deplorable conditions. They have no running water or toilets, no beds to sleep on, and they lack what we consider basic necessities. I've helped train pastors from across Kenya, Uganda, and Sudan. One of the pastors that I've gotten to know has started Celebrate Recovery in a refugee camp in Sudan. I was able to see him on our last trip in April and hear about the amazing ways that God is using him to share Celebrate Recovery with people living in refugee camps that literally have nothing. This Monday, I'm going back to Kenya, along with Jan Thomas, Joe Clark, and Linda Messner. We've been invited to teach Celebrate Recovery to prison chaplains from some of the 93 prisons across Kenya to equip them to start Celebrate Recovery in their respective prisons. They're so hungry for the healing that comes through the Christ-centered 12 steps of Celebrate Recovery. We'll be sharing our experiences and our testimonies about what God has done in our lives and share the hope that we've found through Jesus Christ as we equip them to start their own programs. Last year, I also had the privilege to travel to Ukraine and share Celebrate Recovery with rehabilitation centers and church leaders. There is such a need and desire for Celebrate Recovery in this desolate country. I'll be going back there in October with a team to teach Celebrate Recovery at Donetsk Christian University and also in Kiev. My life has taken many unexpected turns, and this is certainly one of them. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever imagine that one day God would be using my experiences with overcoming an abusive beginning to help people on the other side of the world. If someone had first told me when I came to Celebrate Recovery that I would be taking mission trips teaching about Celebrate Recovery, I would not have believed it. Today, there's nothing more satisfying to me than doing mission works and sharing about Celebrate Recovery, using my greatest hurt to help others. I believe that God blessed me through those and many other experiences while on mission because through Celebrate Recovery, I learned to completely trust him, and I was obedient to him when he wanted me to go on that first mission trip, and I had no idea why. In some ways, I feel like the Israelites must have felt after they had wandered in the desert for 40 years and finally arrived in the Promised Land. Deuteronomy 2:7 Moses tells them, "The Lord your God has blessed everything you've done and watched your every step through this great wilderness. During these 40 years, the Lord your God has been with you and provided for your needs so that you lack nothing." I feel like I've been a slave delivered from the wilderness. Even though I didn't realize it, God was with me in preparing my heart so I could serve him this way today. I was surprised the most that God would use me for something like this. I'm still in awe of the amazing experiences. I've seen such strong faith in people who have so little. My personal faith in God has grown by leaps and bounds, and I feel at peace now because I know I'm doing what God wants me to do. I thank God that I'm able to be here today to share my story and experiences of the healing that I got through the Celebrate Recovery. I don't think it's an accident that I showed up that first Friday night for Celebrate Recovery meeting in this very room almost 5 years ago. I don't think it's an accident that some of you are here this morning to hear my story. I'm very happy to share with you that my husband Michael and I will celebrate our 7th wedding anniversary this Sunday. And we're doing very well. My daughter, she's one of my closest friends. And she's given me the 2 best grandchildren any proud Nana could want. I'm also blessed to have a lot of real, godly women friends. I know many of you are new to CR. I encourage you to work through the 8 principles of Celebrate Recovery and let God bring healing to your life. Maybe you've been a leader for a while and you're wondering what God wants you to do next. Ask God how he wants to use your biggest hurt to help others. Maybe he wants you to go on a mission trip. Believe me, if he wants you to go, he will equip you. All I do is show up. He does the rest. My life verse is Proverbs 3:5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will direct your paths. I thank God that I've lived this verse by heart, most of the time anyway, and my life is so much better today. I have a lot less worries and more peace than I ever imagined possible because I do trust God. And I know He has a plan for my life, and I want to do my part to fulfill it for His glory. Thank you for letting me share.